Hello, today I would like to describe the WebSoDa framework. WebSoDa stands for WebSocket-based Data Binding Framework. This is a framework which is used to couple user interfaces with data models. The user interfaces are web-based user interfaces, and one example can we see here. So we have an HTML page which does have a header and a body. And the interesting part is actually this form. So you have a form here where you can enter data about a person. So the first name and the last name of a person, the status if he's married, and the age. So let's have a look how the browser would render this page. Now here we already get a little window saying that this browser does not support WebSockets. So this is the key feature. You actually need a browser which supports WebSockets. So let's open up the Chrome browser, which is a browser who comes with WebSocket support, and you see how the browser does render this minimal HTML page. So I guess there's nothing which surprises you now. So you have 4 attributes you can enter on this HTML page. So now we've seen the user interface. Let's have a look at the model description. So we actually want to couple this HTML user interface to a servlet backend. So here we have a servlet project, which comes with one class, our model class, which is a person class. And here in the outline view, we already see that the person has several attributes, so-called fields. So it has a field age, first name, last name, married. And then it comes with several getter methods and with several setter methods. So this is what you would call a POJO. So POJO stands for plain old Java object. And we want to instantiate one of these classes and then set the attributes if the UI changes. Now we've seen how the user interface looks like and how the model looks like. Now we actually want to establish the data binding at the front end. So there is a mechanism based on microdata, and I will explain this now. So here we have our regular HTML page. Here's the form, and the microdata actually exists of 3 keywords. This is item scope, item type, and item prop to establish an extension vocabulary for HTML5. So we actually want to use our data binding within this form. So this is our scope. So we just have to enter the keyword item scope. We have to give it a type. So we say item type equals http://webcomposition.net/data binding. So the type just distinguishes the microdata-based vocabulary from different vocabularies you could use. And then you actually have the keyword item prop, and here you actually can specify the binding. So in order to specify the binding, we have 3 attributes to fill. So we have the ID, then we have the event type, and we have the binding mode. So the idea is just, to have a reference in the backend, so which input should go into which model element. So let's say this is the first name input ID. Event type. Here you can specify whenever the synchronization mechanism should start. So here you can actually specify several events, several JavaScript events. So you have mouse events like mouse over, then you have key events like key down, and then you have focus events like focus out. So let's say this should be written to the backend always if a key is up and if the focus is out. And the binding mode, there are two binding modes. So there's a two-way binding. So actually everything, when you do a change on the UI, this is written back to the model. And if something in the model changes, this is also, we can notice this on the UI. So this is the two-way binding mode. Now we have to establish this binding properties for all of our input fields. So let's give it an ID, last name input, and here we just say, oh, just want to write it back on a key up event. And the binding mode two-way is actually the default binding mode, so we don't even have to specify it. So let's do this also for the other two properties. Just merit input. Let's say if we click on the mouse, we want to synchronize it. And this is the H input. Do we want to synchronize it on double click events? So this is pretty much it. So we have to add the three keywords to our form, and then within the item prop value field, then we really have to specify the binding. This is it, because everything else what happens, the WebSoDa JS component takes care of. After specifying the user interface part of the data binding, we need to specify the backend model part of the data binding. Therefore, we go to our server-side project, and there's actually, as I told you, it's a servlet project. So let's have a look at the servlet class. The servlet class does have one method, which is called doWebSocketConnect. So this is the method that gets called every time a client tries to connect using a WebSocket connection. Actually, what it does is just creating a new socket instance. New socket instance then calls the init data binding method, which is the interesting method here. And at first it actually looks if within the servlet context, if there is an object. So if there is no object, we just create a new data binding context. If there is an object, we just retrieve this object. So what is the data binding context? The data binding context is a class which manages all the established bindings. Here we do have a look at the outline. So we see we can add bindings, we can get bindings, we can update the model, and we can update the UI. So this is the class, once again, to manage all the existing bindings. So now we want to create a person and fill this person with real data. So we say person p equals new person, and then we set the first name, which is Jack. We set the last name, which is Jenkins. We do set his marriage status. Let's say this is false. And we set the age. Let's say he's 22. So now we have a real instance of person. And now we need to establish the bindings. So we use our data binding context instance and we say add binding, and then we just create a new binding. And as we can see, there is a binding class which takes an object, a string, and a string. So let's have a look at the binding class. Actually, it takes the model instance and then it takes a field. So the data is written to which field, and then it needs an ID. So it needs to push messages to the client, and then it needs to identify for which input field is this model element. So the model element in this case is our person. The field name is first name, and the ID is first name input. So this is it. This is the very first binding, and now we need to do this 4 times. So we need to bind the last name property. We need to bind the age. And we need to bind the married status. And this is pretty much everything you have to do in order to establish the backend data binding. Now we've actually established the required bindings, and now we can start up our WebSocket server. We do this by launching the Jetty Launcher class. It's a regular Java application based on the Jetty WebSocket server. Now the console tells us it started, and now we go back to our HTML page, open it with a regular browser. Of course, we do need WebSocket support. This is why we use the Chrome browser. And yeah, what happened right now is that actually initial values were set. The first name was set to Jack, the last name to Jenkins, Marriott was not clicked, and the age was set to 22. So these are actually the initial settings we defined here in our binding. So as soon as the client connects, it gets the initial data set. So now what actually happens here, if I type in something, we already see on the console something is happening. But to show this even better, let's just create a new Chrome instance and let's run them side by side. And now if I type in here something, we see this is instantly replicated to the other browser instance. So here I said it just should synchronize on double click. So see, it actually synchronizes on double click. Yeah, this is actually how it works. What we could do now live, we could change the event types we want to listen to. So let's say the age should just be synchronized on the focus out event. Okay, we have to save it. Now let's reload this here. And also reload this here. And see, I can enter something, I can double click, I can enter something new. It does not get replicated until it loses the focus. So we don't have to compile anything. If we would just want to change the events, it works instantly. So this was the walkthrough through the WebSoDa data binding framework. Thank you very much. Bye bye.